So again, thank you so much for coming. We had a really good turnout. We have a tremendous speaker lineup tonight, as you know, if you looked at the agenda. And I'll tell you a little bit about me. I'm a social entrepreneur. I'm a university professor, as well as a public educator, and this is public education. I'm also a public policy consultant and advocate for the green economy and climate change mitigation. I have to look at my notes to see what I've done in my life. Prior to moving to San Diego in 2006, I literally blew into town because I was almost killed twice by Hurricane Katrina in Florida and Hurricane Wilma in Florida, and 50 named storms, many of which we evacuated from and hunkered down at family and friends' homes because they were so serious. So this was the famous 04-05 season when we first got a hint that something was really wrong with climate change. Now, I worked at NASA for over 20 years, and I was working with NASA at the time in Florida, and I thought I knew the science well enough. And so I went back and said, I must not have been reading the right journal or the right articles. So I went back and looked at what the hurricane experts were saying online, and they are all in shock about what happened in 04 and 05 on the East Coast. That was the beginning of what we now all accept, at least I hope in this room, as climate change and extreme weather. It was completely off the charts, the 50 named storms in 2 years in the East Coast. And many, many people's lives were dramatically affected. Mine was. That's when I decided that perhaps it would be wise to return to my home state of California. And I couldn't think of a better place than San Diego. And I arrived here, and there was an enormous fire from extreme weather. So by now, my friends are saying, Kathleen, is it you? Well, it turns out I wasn't sure. Actually, a NASA person actually said that I was the cause. And I said, that's so complimenting. You think I'm that powerful. But I'm telling you, you just haven't been affected yet. Then that person who lived in Northern California realized that her home was at sea level and realized that she was going to be underwater in 20 years. Of course, I feel for her. So then, as people are personally affected, we living in California, we began to realize that San Diegans understood it because of fire, and Southern Californians understood it because of fire. A lot of people in Northern California, even the smartest ones in Silicon Valley, didn't get it then in 06. Everybody gets it now, who is evidence-based. While I was at NASA, I worked on a lot of advanced technology programs. I had a great time there, but the hurricanes were a life-changing experience for me. And so even though I was able to work in closed-loop life support, and I was actually able, and I have no business doing this, co-founding a science called astrobiology that you may have heard of, which is the reason that we now have planetary explorers on Mars at the moment. That's the search for microbial life. Working, I brought Alvin Toffler into NASA because he's a futurist and we're futurists, so I thought this was going to be great, and it was. Working with people like Baruch Blumberg, who won the Nobel Prize for curing a variant of hepatitis. I had a great time, and at the same time I got to do one of the things I really love, which is enact social change through public policy. So I talked myself into being a congressional advisor to NASA headquarters and life sciences directorate there, and I was a policy director and a founder of a group called the Aerospace States Association, which was composed of governors and lieutenant governors around the table like you are now. And what we did was we tried to figure how to take space technology and bring it down to earth for benefit in the states. And they're still going strong. Finally, I want to share, personally, that I come from an energy family. My father was an executive at Hanford, which you're probably aware, did the plutonium processing for the Manhattan Project. Unfortunately, he died a very early and untimely and mysterious death, I believe because of it. Subsequent science showed, and my own health report showed, that I too had been exposed to low-level radiation. I joined a class action suit 30 years ago, and last year, after 30 years of denial by the forces that be, we won. And I didn't get a lot of money, But what I did get, I didn't even pay for my postage back and forth with the attorney for 30 years. But what I did get was, what we did get is we put on the record the impact of low-dose radiation on thyroid in America. And this is something that is very important for future sufferers and potential sufferers here who may be exposed from low-dose radiation from San Onofre. I believe we all are being exposed, but that's just my bias, because I was. So we all know it's going to be a heavy lift getting off of dirty and dangerous energy, both. And so tonight we're going to, kind of move forward. We're going to continue to move forward down that path, though, as we look towards a zero carbon, as Mayor Fellner and others have referred to, 100% renewable energy society in San Diego. I would assert to you, and one of the reasons I do this public education, is that the carbon era has served its purpose. No reason to be bitter. It was instrumental in the industrial age that brought us to this moment, that helped make these tables that we're using. And it is over. It's done. It's over. It just hasn't been told. It just, so people that are invested in the status quo have just not accepted that it's over yet. And that's an issue that we have to deal with. Others have accepted, and we have someone here tonight who works for a German solar company, Wirsol, who will show you that other countries all over the world have accepted that it's over, have moved on, and the United States is very far behind. We have a mayor who said he would like San Diego to be the solar capital of the world, and at the moment Germany is the solar global leader. Denmark and others are doing pretty well too, as I understand it. So we're going to hear about how others are doing it so that we can catch up. And for each of you who, the real economy that matters for all of us is our personal economy, our household economy. So I wanted to make sure to bring Mr. Scott Gaius from ADECO, who's a recruiter and a manager here of the San Diego office, to talk about search, because I find a lot of people come to these events, which I do on a bi-monthly basis, and they're interested in searching. So Scott's going to talk about, how to proceed with your dream, green career in that field. I realize a lot of you are. How many of you are entrepreneurs as well? Good, because the next event I'm going to do is going to be called Green Entrepreneurship Academy, and we're going to bring in some really top-notch people and talk about some very interesting things and do a workshop as well for a half a day. So, because I like to help people find their way, just as someone helped me find my way, which I'm still searching for in the green sector. And I just want to point out about back to the jobs issue, and Scott will elaborate on the macro view, is that I did research, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics has found, by looking at all job categories, every conceivable job category that they do, 00135, whatever their code is, from finance to real estate, everything now has a sustainability component. And X percentage, 2%, 3% of penetration in that job category is occurring. Their conclusion was, okay, that's not a lot, but all that means is eventually the entire segment is going to have a sustainability component. We're all going to have to understand sustainability. And that means, and I think that's good news, because it means that whatever it is you really want to do, you can do it as a green professional. You just need to figure out what is the piece that I bring. And right now, employers need that piece, because here in California, for example, we have AB 32, and a lot of companies now have to do reporting. And also because it saves money, and it makes money for companies. Cricket is sitting here in a LEED certified building. It's saving them money. I want to thank Cricket, by the way, for being our venue host. They have been for a couple of years. Thank you so much. You may join us later. And with that, there's a lot of folks I want to thank, but I'll do that throughout the night. Jay Whitaker is here with Cricket, and she's going to introduce our first speaker. So, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jay Whitaker. I probably met each and every one of you as you walked in. As Kathleen mentioned, I am an employee here at Cricket. I've been here over 5.5 years, and most of my background and degrees are in corporate finance, but I've also worked here in corporate real estate. I am the Whitaker and the Connell Whitaker group, so I'm also involved with all those events that Kathleen does. So thank you all for coming, and I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Peter Vogel is the Executive Vice President at Warsaw Solar Canada. After successfully co-launching the Canadian office of Warsaw in 2011, currently developing over 30 megawatts of solar power generation facilities, Peter is relocating to San Diego to open the new U.S. headquarters for Warsaw here in San Diego. Consistent with the company's worldwide mission, Peter will be focusing on assisting governments, utilities, and enterprises in the transition to 100% green energy. His principal areas of expertise are project acquisition, development, and EPC, engineering, procurement, and construction. Warsaw, a leading international developer and turnkey provider of solar photovoltaic systems, helped pioneer the German model of best practices in renewable energy that will be discussed tonight. Germany remains the global leader in solar PV and renewable energy technology. Last year alone, Germany brought online more than 7.6 gigawatts of solar. That's roughly 7 times that of the state of California. Prior to joining Warsaw, Peter was an associate and project lead at ROEM Corporation, a San Jose, California-based property developer, successfully overseeing the design, approval, and financing of new construction of residential and mixed-use projects. Prior to his tenure at ROEM, Peter served as Director of Marketing at Sundance Development Corporation in Toronto. Peter holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of San Francisco, which is one of my alma maters, and a master's degree from the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. So everyone, please give a very warm welcome to Mr. Peter Vogel. So do you want a little dimmer, everyone?
Yeah, there's a glare on that.
Thanks, Jay. Better?
Well, good evening, everyone, and Jay, thank you for that very complete introduction. It's certainly, after hearing Kathleen's accomplishments, it is a tough act to follow, but I want to thank Kathleen and Jay for putting this event on tonight, and thanking all of you for being here and joining me. Kathleen had asked me to speak about a few things specifically regarding the German solar PV market. And we're at a critical juncture here in the solar market and renewable energy market in California. And as we see renewable energy proliferate around the globe, and we see different countries and different jurisdictions approach the problem in different ways, it becomes increasingly important, I think, to look to some of those pioneers like Germany and like other European countries, to look at what they did right and what they did wrong, and what we can learn from them in order to make our efforts to reach 100% renewables more effective. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to discuss this evening for you, and I'll try to keep it short. We've got a number of wonderful speakers lined up after me. Versol, who is Versol, first of all? I'll tell you a little bit about the company. A basic review for those of you who may not be totally familiar with the difference between FITs, power purchase agreements, and net metering. And then I'm going to delve right into the German solar PV market, including specifically policies, what economic impacts the very broad-based renewable energy policy had, specifically with job creation, a little bit about how projects are financed in Germany and how a real comprehensive support mechanism supports the financing of projects in Germany. And finally, talk a little bit about the returns to owners and investors and some of the unique things that Germany is doing right now. And of course, most importantly, lessons learned, what we can glean from this, from the German experience. So quickly about Versol, who are we? We're a solar service provider specializing in the planning, design, financing, construction, and operation of solar projects ranging from size of small commercial rooftops and residential rooftops all the way to large utility scale solar parks. We've currently installed over 7,000 systems worldwide, which represent about 600 megawatts of installed capacity. These are actual projects up and running and pumping electrons, not as some people like to call it bragawatts of projects that may be anywhere in the development process. We currently have offices in 12 countries with over 270 employees, which includes a very phenomenal staff of dedicated engineers and technical specialists, numbering over 80 folks. Currently, our annual CO2 savings from our projects alone represent over 180,000 tons of CO2 that's diverted from the atmosphere. And just to give you an idea, 600 megawatts is about enough to power 170,000 households. The systems we specialize in are residential, so rooftop solar that you find on residential homes, commercial rooftops, large ground-mounted systems and utility scale projects, PV hybrid systems. These involve diesel substitution, so transferring a microgrid that may be in a remote location run by diesel into renewable green energy, and as well as things such as carport systems and unique types of solar integrated building designs. So to cover some of the basics, I wanted to talk about the difference in approaches and some of the more common structures you see with regards to financing and building PV. The first option, which we're going to focus on today, is a feed-in tariff. And some of the key features of this are that it's a standard offer program, i.e. it's available to everyone by right. Feed-in tariff is a long-term contract, which is guaranteed for usually a term of 20 years. And it's a contract between the renewable energy producer, the system owner, and a government or utility who pays the feed-in tariff. Key concept is also guaranteed access to the grid. So as I mentioned, standard offer, right to connect. Anyone can put PV on their building as long as it meets the required building criteria and such. But everyone can connect PV to the grid and get a guaranteed revenue stream from it. And again, that provides a certainty of revenue and investment protection, which really makes it easy to finance and easy to grasp from an economic standpoint. Pricing for feed-in tariffs are based on the power generated, so you're paid per kilowatt hour that flows into the grid. And rates are usually technology dependent, and different rates will be set for wind, biogas, solar PV, etc. One unique thing that we've seen in Germany, which is now spread elsewhere, is tariff degression, which means a reduction in rates over time to reflect things such as improved efficiency and lower system costs. In terms of paying for the feed-in tariffs, which is always an important question for our friends in government, the cost of the FIT is borne by the government or, in many cases, the ratepayers directly. And of course, the cost of operation and maintenance of the facility is the responsibility of the generator who's selling electricity into the grid. Power purchase agreement is another structure that you find, which you may be quite familiar with from larger deals that have been done here in the United States. Power purchase agreement, similar kind of concept in terms of a long-term contract, but this is between two parties as a power producer and a user or buyer. Similarly, looking for that longer-term 5, 10, or 20-year contract. Systems can be connected behind the meter so that power is consumed where it is generated. So this is most often the case on larger-scale commercial rooftops, or for the large-scale utility-sized ground-mounted solar parks, which are the big projects you see being done out in the deserts here. Those are connected directly to the transmission or distribution system under a PPA with utilities such as SDG&E. And again, power purchase agreements are one-off contracts and typically involve the negotiation of balance of liabilities between parties, which is a key factor of this. Pricing is, again, based on electrons generated and kilowatt hours generated under take and pay, so whatever you take, you pay for. And it may incorporate things such as price adjustments, buyout clauses, etc. Cost of PPA is borne by the power purchaser, and again, typically operation and maintenance costs will be borne by the seller. The third and last type of structure that's most common in PV is net energy metering, and this is something that you'd be very familiar with if you have solar on your roof here in California. This is a situation where a system on a residential house, for instance, may produce more or less electricity than is needed in that home at any given period of time. If the production at that period of time exceeds the customer demand, the excess energy is then fed into the grid and actually runs the utility meter backwards. Typically once a year, your account will be netted out and they'll figure out how much you drew from the system versus how much you put in. And you'll either be, your bills will be adjusted accordingly, or you'll be given a rebate based on excess energy fed into the grid above and beyond your consumption. So this will give you an idea of illustrated example of the different structures here. So let's take a look at the German PV market. And what are we talking about in terms of scale? You can see that the growth in PV installations has continued to rise rapidly over the last several years. Currently, there's over 28 million kilowatt hours, 28 billion kilowatt hours produced by solar in Germany. Currently, Germany produces enough solar power to satisfy the demand for approximately 8 million households. And in 2012, in the summer of 2012, Germany for the first time sourced more than 50% of its power from PV, which is quite a landmark.
Wow.
So as you can see, the growth of PV installations from 2000 to the present, running through 2012. And I want you to note the exponential growth that we've seen in the mid part of the last decade, and how it's continued to grow rapidly into 2010. We're seeing a bit of a plateau right now. Still very strong numbers in terms of installation, but you're really seeing a maturity in the market there. And we'll get into it a little bit more detail, but this is really a sign of a maturing market and of Germany reaching structural capacity for the amount of PV it can install every year. So as Germany is sort of at the tail end of its rapid growth cycle, and as we in the US and in California are sort of at the early part of this exponential growth curve, we can try to learn a little bit from what Germany did and take sort of the best ideas that they had and avoid some of the pitfalls and mistakes that they made. This is just a comparison of Germany versus the US. You can see how we follow very similar trend lines, albeit lagged behind perhaps by 3 years. Just comparison of macro data between California and Germany, and I want to point out a couple important things. Specifically, the difference between German and U.S. installations, although you'll notice that the U.S. is catching up quite readily. But more importantly, I want you to notice the difference in the breakdown of system types. So it's in the yellow-orange chart on the bottom. If you look at the comparison between residential, non-residential, and utility scale installations in Germany and the U.S., you see that rooftop, particularly commercial rooftop, really dominates the German PV market. And this is in stark contrast to the U.S., where it's still majority dominated by utility scale projects. And so this is a bit of a cause for concern, and certainly some of this data is influenced by the fact that a number of large utility scale projects came online in 2012. But really, when we talk about 100% renewables, when we talk about the benefits of distributed generation, and when we talk about ambitious initiatives such as the San Diego Solar Initiative and what the county and the school board are doing to put solar on rooftops, it really shows that there's still a tremendously underserved rooftop market in the U.S. So how did Germany get to where it is today? I'm going to run through a history of policies and programs, and again, I wanted to provide you with some good information on this. This presentation will be available, so don't worry, there will be no quiz at the end of it. But to start off, this initiative, federal initiative from Germany, dates back to 1991 and the initial Electricity Feed Act. This is the first kind of broad-based FIT program that we really saw directed towards renewable energy. The pricing was set such that 80 to 90% of the historical electricity retail prices was used as the basis of the feed-in tariffs for electricity generated from renewable sources. So this is just a very simple calculation of taking what the residential or retail consumer rate was, taking 80 or 90 to 90% of that, and paying that to renewable energy producers. Now, this drastically favored wind power producers due to the low feed-in rates and the comparatively higher costs of solar compared to wind at the time. Eventually, the economics eroded due to falling retail electricity prices. And although the program was limited in its success, it started a political movement to really build upon this and promote the creation of renewable energy in a more sustainable and long-term way. Moving on to the mid-90s, we had the 1,000 Roof program. So this was a pretty quick stimulus program that was in the form of grants and really served to kind of offer the types of rebates that you're seeing with the California Solar Initiative and similar rebates. There was a quota of number of installations per federal state. And again, this really helped kind of buoy the market, but really wasn't a long-term solution. So only German producers were eligible. Foreign modules were accepted. Installations had several metering requirements. And it's important to note that this was actually a pretty brilliant idea to incorporate this into the program. So they had specific meters installed to measure the performance of PV over time and create a database and a record of how PV performed in different conditions over different times of year all over the country. So they built this great database of information that they could later work with to help fine-tune their subsequent programs. This information was collected through the Fraunhofer Institute, which is today the sort of the leading institute in Germany and throughout Europe, which does forecasts of system production on PV power plants. It is generally used by lenders to underwrite projects. So fast forward to 1999, and again, the Germans, liking to move in logical steps, went to the 100,000 Roof program. And this was really supported by below market rate financing from the KfW, which is the Reconstruction Credit Institute in Germany, sort of a state and federal owned bank. The objective was for 300 megawatts of newly installed solar. Soft loans were made available to people who wished to build PV projects with very attractive interest rates at the time, 1.9% annual percentage rate instead of what the market rate was at 6.4. And all installations had to meet a minimum threshold of 1 kilowatt, which is a small residential rooftop system. So fast forward to where we are today and the current FIT legislation which is in place in Germany. It's known as the Renewable Energy Act, or in German the EEG, the Erneuerbare Energiengesetz. And don't worry, you don't have to spell that. Priority access was given for renewable energy to the power grid. This is a very important concept. Not just the right to connect, but having priority over other energy sources to connect to the grid. Again, supported by a legislative obligation from the grid operators to purchase the electricity produced from the renewable energy systems. Again, the concept of a fixed price or tariff, so every kilowatt hour that's produced is bought at a certain rate. And tariffs were differentiated based on source and size. This also incorporated a tariff degression, which is still active to this day, and systematically lowers tariffs over time. On one hand, to reflect lower costs, but also to incentivize further cost reductions and efficiencies in PV installation and system component manufacturing. The current digression pace, if you can believe it, is at 1% a month, which is a very aggressive lowering of the rates. It's important to note that feed-in tariffs are not a government subsidy. The costs are redistributed to the consumer on their electricity bill. Bonuses are given out for things such as innovative practices, new systems that are developed, or early bird bonuses, so early adopters of the system, similar to what we see in some cases in the California Solar Initiative. The initial tariff, basic tariff for wind energy and solar, that's subsequently reduced over time. And again, the annual decreases range from 0 to 9% of the tariff. On PV, stuck right now at systematically 1% a month. And again, establishing specific targets for solar energy growth and the increase or decrease of digression, so the reduction in prices over time. As I mentioned, there's an equalization of costs. So the additional costs the utilities had to bear to connect PV systems and to pay the feed-in tariffs were ultimately distributed over the ratepayers. The market is still supported by low-cost financing from the KfW. This, as opposed to taking the form of grants, is now taking the form of various subsidized loans, other energy efficient incentives, And you see KFW very active in the housing and environment side of things, creating standards for energy efficiency houses. The KFW IPEX is the largest subsidiary of the KFW group, and it is the arm that does the major lending in terms of commercial and utility scale PV projects. 40% of all solar projects in Germany are financed through the KFW. And they have a specific list of requirements that they look at when they want to underwrite a project, and these are critical things which they say a project must meet, critical characteristics a project must meet to be financeable. You have to have a very stable and reliable legal and regulatory framework, sufficient feed-in tariffs and financial revenue from the production of energy, and that can take the form of a FIT contract or a PPA. Experience in financially sound project partners, so people who know how to execute on projects, who are familiar with the operation and maintenance, and they also like to have German or European participation. Equity contributions as required, economic viability, proper debt service coverage ratios, reserves, etc. And of course, a proven technology, bankable hardware. Fees for legal and technical are typically borne by the borrower. The minimum loan amount for these projects are usually 25 to 30 million euros. And they will finance up to 100% of the cost of your energy system. They like to see long-term maintenance agreements, including performance and availability guarantees. So whoever's operating the system needs to provide a guarantee that the system is going to be up and running a certain amount of time per year and producing a certain number of kilowatt hours per year. And then 2 independent solar assessments, such as one by the Fraunhofer Institute. And I wanted to run through these list of requirements, first of all, because I'm a bit of a finance geek, but second of all, because I think it's important for everyone to understand what the real key aspects of a project are to make it economical, to make it marketable, to make it bankable and financeable. Because ultimately, that's what's going to help us reach our renewable energy targets, is the ability not only to set targets and to develop policies, but also to encourage the private sector to participate in the financing of these. So how's the FIT regime paid for in Germany? As I mentioned, the cost of feed-in tariff is borne by the ratepayer, so it's spread over the energy consumers. Utilities have the authority to charge what's called a green energy fee or levy to the customer. And since 2009, this compensation is basically based on the difference between what the cost of these feed-in tariffs are in the projects to connect them to pay the feed-in tariff rates, and what the average wholesale power price is for the subsequent year ahead. So again, allowing the utilities to offset that increased cost of incorporating renewables into the energy mix. Costs covered include the tariffs and the grid upgrades. And compensation is paid by the end consumers through the levy, and they pay on their power bills. So every year, the German authorities take a decision on the exact amount. Currently, or I should say last year, it stood at about $15 a month for the average household, and this year it's gone up to $22 a month for the average household. So the EEG levy is not only an effective tool to help pay for a broad-based FIT program and to encourage the development of renewables, but it also acts as a strong incentive, financial incentive, to homeowners and to businesses to adopt PV and to install it on their rooftops, to say, well, I'm paying this energy levy, I may as well get in on it as well. So it's a very powerful financial incentive. Just to kind of give you an idea of how this all flows, it's always easier to see a diagram. So you see government has facilitated, pointer here. The government has facilitated the creation of the FIT program, sets the rates, and the utility subsequently has the obligation to pay via feed-in tariff to the producer for electricity produced and fed into the grid. And then the consumer, on the other end, takes a mix of conventional energy, electricity, and renewable generated electricity, and pays the utility rates plus the applicable FIT EEG surcharge. So what is our ultimate objective in Germany? Well, the sort of holy grail of PV and of renewable energy is to move towards grid parity, and that is a place where the cost of renewable energy is equal to the cost of more traditional fossil fuel sources. So where are we right now in this? You can see that the trend lines here. On the green line, you have the cost of solar, the power generation cost of solar PV. On the bottom, the purple line, you have the retail electricity price. So what you're seeing is a situation where through the various incentives, through the systematic lowering of feed-in tariff rates, and through the gradual increase in electricity costs due to inflation, due to grid upgrades, due to costs of fossil fuel inputs, you're seeing a true crossover right now where, in many cases, the feed-in tariff that German solar producers will get is actually at or below what the end consumer pays for the electricity. So we've crossed that grid parity threshold and are now moving in opposite directions. Just to give everyone some context, the FIT rates are listed on the right-hand side there, ranging from 22 cents a kilowatt hour to 15 cents. I converted this all to US dollars. And if you thought our power bills are high in California, you can see what they pay in Germany for their power. Again, an even stronger incentive to participate and offset some of those costs. So what are some of the challenges that this FIT program has brought on, not only in economic sense, but also in terms of the utilities and the grid operator sense? I think that German utilities have been dealing with this for quite some time, and it's just sort of now creeping into the minds of North American utilities that distributed generation and the proliferation of renewables, particularly solar, is incredibly disruptive to their traditional business model. If you think about it, the traditional electric utility industry business model has remained virtually unchanged for almost 100 years, based on a model of centralized generation and large-scale power production plants, nuclear, coal, and then transmission over long distances, and then subsequent distribution over smaller networks to homes and to businesses. This was an effective system when it was implemented, but as you have seen, no doubt, reflected in your utility costs, this is an incredibly costly model to sustain, and ultimately one that's unsustainable. The upkeep of the infrastructure and the upgrades necessary to meet growing population demand under the traditional centralized generation model. We've had a number of factors that have sort of converged here to create this very disruptive situation for utilities. The falling costs of distributed generation are a big one. Focus on new distributed generation technologies and the increased political will, regulatory will, and the relative ease by which distributed generation is becoming implementable across different markets. And of course, government programs to incentivize technologies such as solar and wind, combined with the declining price of natural gas, slowing economic growth trends, and rising electricity prices. So I want to just call your attention to the graph on the left here. One unique feature about solar and why it has potentially such a dramatic impact on electricity rates and on electricity rate billing is that the output from solar is highest during the peak consumption hours. So the hours of 10 to 2, when typically the wholesale price of electricity is the highest, is exactly when solar is outputting its greatest amount of energy. So how has this manifested itself in Germany? Well, you can see here that from 2007 to 2011, solar PV, principally in combination with other factors, reduced the wholesale price of electricity by up to 40% as a result of peak power offset. So you can see where the companies were able to charge almost less, just about half, 40% less than what they were at 4 years prior. So the utilities are understandably resistant to this kind of development in the energy industry. And we understand why, because it's ultimately a threat to them. But I think it's important that the public and the governments let utilities know that they need to see rooftop solar as really a security measure, as a possibility to strengthen the grid, and acknowledging the technical advantages of distributed generation. As I mentioned, the model of centralized generation and large-scale, long-distance transmission is ultimately one that's inefficient, not only in terms of fuel sources, but also in terms of the losses that occur from transmitting power for long distances. So if you think about it this way, total losses over transmission may reach up to 25%. So 1 kilowatt hour of solar generated power can replace about 1.25 kilowatt hours of coal power. So again, distributed generation allows you to avoid network losses, increase network stability and security, and ultimately reduce the cost of future grid upgrades, because you're no longer required to upgrade vast transmission infrastructure if power is being generated where it's used. Talk a bit about best practices and some of the unique structures that have emerged out of the German market. This one is one that we're particularly fond of and which we have worked quite often with municipalities and local governments in Germany. So public-private partnerships between local governments and private sector developers. Excellent way to leverage private sector expertise, really with the objective of unlocking value in municipally owned assets. The participation of a public partner grants you certain access to attractive financing, due to either credit enhancement or simply access to grant and loan programs that the private sector does not have access to. No restrictions in Germany on the local government participation in the FIT program. Every municipality can choose its own energy mix, whether depending on geographic considerations, depending on preference, can choose biogas, wind, solar, and all are covered under the feed-in tariff program. Jobs and benefits stay local. Municipalities who are able to establish a strong local government-supported solar initiative are going to create a real industry node in that area and encourage local jobs and encourage the growth of local PV installers and attract other companies from abroad as well. You can synergize this type of PPP structure with things such as community ownership of solar. So the city may choose to share some fractionalized ownership with members of the community, or it can dovetail nicely with aggregate purchasing, similar to the CCA structure which we have here in California, which allows jurisdictions to purchase energy at wholesale prices and sell it to consumers. Zero environmental impacts. When you have a broad-based public solar initiative like this, you can achieve some of the cost efficiencies of large-scale utility PV without the issues of covering up 120 acres of desert land, or invading species, or otherwise adversely impacting the natural environment. And rooftop solar in California is exempt from CEQA. A couple structures have been implemented. Obviously in Germany we see a FIT model with co-ownership, but there's also been cases elsewhere around the world where we've done it under a PPA model, or simply a rooftop leasing model, where the municipality leases the rooftops in exchange for an ongoing cash flow. Again, I think that anytime a government, a local government, chooses to really be a leader in solar, it's important that they offer transparency and hold themselves accountable as well. And one of the great ways they can do that in a real public and engaging way is the ability to post results and to display instantaneous system output information via the web that is accessible to everyone. So this is an example of a city that we work with here. And you can see that you can access the online portal, look exactly where the systems are located, what each system is producing at any given time. And it's also a great educational tool, in addition to getting people engaged and interested in what the city is producing on its solar rooftops. Again, I think that one of the very smart things that the German government did was establish a database early on that really was able to benchmark performance of PV systems across different conditions through different geographic areas. I think that's something that is also very important to do on a more local level. Not only so that the city can monitor how effective its PV systems are running, but also so that, again, members of the public can see exactly what is happening at any given point in time. You also want to ensure that you identify any irregularities, so ongoing system monitoring is key regardless. So another innovative type of practice which Germany has really pioneered, and this is one example that I'm particularly fond of, and I thought I would share it with you today. So something what we call demand-side management. And you've seen a couple times the curve of PV production over the course of the day. And what demand-side management involves is really shifting the load where possible on a building or a facility such that it, as closely as possible, matches the output from the system. And these can incorporate other technologies such as battery storage and other types of energy efficiency measures. This particular project we did was with a water utility, and we used solar to pump water from their wells to feed the water system. Now the water system had a unique property is that you required energy to draw the water up from underground, but then the water was pumped to various storage tanks which were actually at elevation. And our engineers took a look at it and they said, well, you know, a water tank full of water at an elevation of 700 feet is actually kind of like a huge battery, because you can store that energetic potential in those water tanks for use later. So what we were able to advise the water utility on and create a program for them was the ability to shift the pumping during the peak daylight hours, such that the PV system was pumping as much water as possible, and you're really maximizing the benefit from that PV system. Even when water wasn't immediately required in the water system, running the pumps as much as possible from solar and pumping that water up into the storage tanks such that it could be used later on in peak hours, such as in the evening or in the morning when people take their morning showers, when solar is not that powerful yet in terms of daytime. So we've heard about some interesting practices. We've heard about how the FIT program evolved. And what always is on the forefront of everyone's mind is what is the economic benefit, and more specifically, what is the job creation that you can expect? Currently in Germany, despite having a couple stagnant years in terms of growth, still remains the world leader in terms of renewable energy and solar PV jobs, with over 370,000 people employed full-time directly in renewable energy specifically, and 150,000 of those in solar. There was recently an article at the end of last month about California now having officially more solar workers than actors, which was a great congratulations. California currently has 43,000 solar jobs, which is a tremendous achievement. In a recent study, it was estimated that per megawatt peak of installed capacity, you can expect 20 job years of manufacturing jobs and 13 job years of service and installation. I realize it's a government metric, which is maybe not all that common, but at the same time you can see here in this chart just what the estimated creation of solar jobs in California is as we move forward through some of these already pretty ambitious solar initiatives that California has enacted. And what I want to point out too is that contrary to a lot of popular belief, the majority of solar jobs, and we've seen this in Germany, we've seen this elsewhere. Ultimately, the majority of jobs are in the installation, the maintenance, and service side of things, as opposed to in the direct manufacturing. Manufacturing is of course, a critical part of the value chain and the supply chain, although it's becoming increasingly automated and increasingly specialized. And really where you're seeing some of the great gains in jobs are on that installation, maintenance side, and some of those ancillary jobs that maybe we don't think of at first in terms of where solar is creating employment. What are some of the lessons we've learned from the German PV market? I think political factors are first and foremost obviously what helped spur on the tremendous growth in Germany. What you see in Germany is the coordinated policies at the local, state, and federal levels that really facilitate the development of PV. For instance, you have a standard offer program that's applicable across Germany. Currently in the US, we have 50 different states, 50 different markets. Everything is uniform and coordinated across the German market, and that includes interconnection procedures, so to connect to the grid, building permits, forms, contracts, etc., all standardized. And that really takes a lot of the soft costs out of the equation. If you look at the difference between what system installation costs are in Germany compared to the US, depending on project type, is anywhere from 40 to 100% more expensive on a per watt basis to install PV here. And where does that huge cost differential come from? It doesn't come from the hardware, because hardware is essentially priced globally, and Americans have access to the global spot market for solar equipment. It's on the installation side. Certainly, rates and wages for installation work in Germany are at, if not higher, than where they are here in the US. Really, that tremendous difference comes from those pesky soft costs. And as the cost of permitting, the cost of interconnection, the cost of waiting, and the cost of financing. And I think that the private sector has done a lot in terms of bringing the overall costs down, finding efficiencies, lowering prices. And really, I think where we're going to see tremendous gains in the next few years in terms of lower system costs and ultimately greater economic feasibility of PV is in the government's ability to lower some of those costs and to streamline the processes. I want to talk about some of the social factors that really played a role in Germany, and we can't discount those. The nuclear disaster in Japan and the reaction that followed in the wake of that in Europe, particularly strong in Germany, just a general rejection of new nuclear. In a recent survey, 62% of Germans said they want or already are producing their own energy. 90% of Germans support an all-renewable energy future. Important economic factors cannot be ignored either. Obviously, we've benefited from a period of uncharacteristically low interest rates. We've also seen dramatic increases in efficiency in PV system component production and installation. I'm sure you all are aware of the tremendous drop in panel prices that we've seen since 2011. Panel prices have come down by about 60%. And again, in Germany, the ability to secure subsidized loans for renewable energy and photovoltaic. The systematic reduction in feed-in tariff rates, which sort of helped encourage that increased efficiency and lower production costs, in addition to the macroeconomic factors that were pushing costs down. And then fundamentally, a greater sensitivity to electricity costs. As I showed earlier, Germans pay a whole lot more for electricity than we do in North America. And as a result, they're much more aware of their consumption and also much more incentivized to offset their consumption via renewable distributed generation.
Peter?